So now we're going to get into more details about observational studies and experiments. With observational studies, we only have one thing to cover, and that's the different types that we might encounter in this course. And there are three. Most often we see cross-sectional studies. Cross-sectional studies where we just collect all of our data at one time. That's probably what you'll be doing with your research project. You're just going to create a survey, you're going to send it out, you're going to get information. That's it. Retrospective studies are where we look backwards in time. So we will ask people, we find some outcome of interest that we want to know. Oh, you passed Stat 119. Let me ask you questions about your study habits. So instead of right now in the middle of the semester, if I want to know who's successful in Stat 119 and I'm doing my research project, I can't do a cross-sectional study because people haven't passed yet. So I need to find people who have already passed and maybe people who didn't, and then ask them questions about the past so I can compare those two groups. Last is a prospective study. If my research project wasn't due at the end of the semester and I had more time, then I could do a prospective study on who's going to pass Stat 119. I could have students log how much they've been studying as they go to the tutoring lab. I could get all their information as we go and follow them to see what happens at the end of the semester. Right? Now, I want you to think about some pros and cons of both the retrospective and prospective studies. You can even use that Stat 119 situation as an example. So if you think about even that 119 thing as an example, let's think of our pros and cons of our retrospective and our prospective. Actually, I'll do them. I don't know why I don't have a red pen right now. It's kind of driving me crazy. Red hat. Cool. All right. So for our retrospective, thinking about that 119 example I just made, if we ask students about how many hours they studied after the fact, it's going to be really hard to remember exactly how much time you spent, right? So somebody who failed the course might be like, I spent so much time. Or someone who passed might not remember and say, okay, well, I didn't spend that much time. It was maybe an hour a week. So one of the negatives of a retrospective exam, I need to change the size. Sorry, I keep easily distracted. I didn't want this thick ass pen. Okay. Is what we call recall bias, right? There's issues with memory, and that's a problem with asking people about the past. Not only just issues of remembering in general, but we may misremember based on what sort of paints the past in a way that we want to remember. I didn't fail 119 because I didn't study. I failed 119 for other reasons that were beyond my control. And I spent all the time I could have studying. So that's a negative with our retrospective study. A positive, and this is not one that you would think of with that 119 example, but a really big positive of the retrospective study is that it works for rare and long-term outcomes. So for 119, if we did a prospective study, it wouldn't be that bad. We wouldn't have to wait that long. It would only be one semester and then we'd have our data. But a lot of the data that we're going to see in class, it's like, well, what's the chance of a student finishing school within 6 years? We talked about that AB 705. What's the chance of a student finishing transferable math within 3 years? If you want to present data and you have to wait 3 years to have it, that's going to be a long wait to get your data, right? 3 years. So that's actually one of our negatives for the prospective study, is it usually takes a ton of time. You have to wait for those outcomes to emerge if we're talking about something that's longer, right? So depending on the situation, that's a big negative. The other nice thing about retrospective, with 119, we're going to have a good number of students passing and failing, so the rare is not much of an issue. But if you did something that was more rare, like lung cancer or brain cancer, and you followed people through in time to see which habits led to developing lung or brain cancer, even if you had a sample of 1,000 people, you might get one that came down after 50 years with one of those diseases, right? So you need to have some other method to go get a substantial sample size of people that are in the group you're interested in. So that's where that retrospective study is really helpful. So it only can be used for common outcomes. Boom. Which is why we have that example here with heart disease going on. So the positives of a prospective study, hopefully you recognize, we could get great data, right? If we know what we're following people through time, we're going to be able to get whatever data we want. You'll sometimes see this called longitudinal. This is the type of study I worked for at UCSD. We used to collect data from, it was a Vietnam era twin study of aging. So we collected data every 5 years on twins. We had them come do an MRI and a bunch of other tests, like how quickly they could sit or walk down a hall, and some mental acuity type tests. And then we would see how that had, what the trajectory of that was over time. So anyways, those are our 3 types of observational studies. Not huge in terms of a test question in my mind, just more of a, I don't know, figuring out which one makes sense in a context might be important.